Welcome to the Listen Up podcast, where we explore hearing loss, communication, connections, and health.
Hey everybody, Dr. Mark Sims here. I'm the host of the Listen Up podcast, where I feature top leaders in healthcare. This episode is brought to you by Listen Up Hearing Center. I help patients to effectively treat their hearing loss so that they can connect better with friends and family and remain independent. The reason I'm so passionate about hearing loss, I lost my brother Robbie twice. First to hearing loss from his radiation to his brain tumor, and then when he passed away. I only care for ears. I'm the E of the ENT. I've performed over 10,000 surgeries and taken care of many more with hearing loss. I'm also the founder of Listen Up Hearing Center, and I've written a book of the same name, Listen Up, A Physician's Guide to Effectively Treating Your Hearing Loss. If you want to learn more about that, go to listenuphearing.com. That's listenuphearing.com. Today, we have a great guest. It's Brian Urban, AUD. He's the president of CounselEAR, which is a software company, and a former private practice owner in Evanston, Illinois. He's the past president of the Academy of Doctors of Audiology, and he's an advisory board member for Salis Osborne College of Audiology. He's a great, interesting guest because he's kind of transitioned from clinical practice to software. Brian, thanks for coming on.
Thank you. Really a pleasure to be here.
And so I assume Evanston, Illinois, that might be the home place of Northwestern University, if I'm not mistaken.
Yes, indeed.
You had a private practice there. What was your pedigree? In other words, how'd you end up there?
Sure. So my first position in the area was actually at Lake Forest Hospital, north of Evanston. I worked there for several years. Prior to that, I worked in Wisconsin. My kind of lead up was while I was in Wisconsin working, and that's actually the origin story for CounselEAR, is I had one of those moments where, you get an idea or you have a reason that you need to do something. And I started working on it then. And as I moved to the Illinois area, I knew starting a private practice was a really good fit for me. In fact, I've bought a very small private practice, was able to build that up and simultaneously build CounselEAR right along with it. And so it was a great venue for me to be able to do both things.
So CounselEAR started out initially as a tool to do what? I mean, I know what it does, but tell the listener.
Yeah, it started off as a tool to counsel patients. And the story, I'll try to keep it as brief as possible, but basically, I was seeing a patient, and I counseled on his hearing loss. He was an older gentleman with a bilateral, high frequency loss, very common noise type exposure hearing loss. And I was fairly new in the profession at that point, and I told him a lot of things, right? I have since simulated it and realized I probably told him about 4 minutes of just pure here's information, right? Just go. And I more or less gave him my graduate dissertation, as part of that audio. And at the end of it, I asked if he had any questions. He said, nope, I don't have any questions. And he went on his way because we talked about amplifications being an option, all kinds of things. And I was working in ENT audiology practice at the time. And so he got some counseling from the ear, nose, throat physician as well, who also did a very good job, I thought, in counseling. And point being, so then 2 weeks later, I see he's on my schedule to talk about amplification. I think, great. He heard my message. He's coming back in. This is all great. So I walk out to the waiting room to get him, and I am holding the door open. I call his name, and a woman stands up. Okay, that's odd. And she walks right towards me, and she's got a gaze just stuck right on my eyes. And as she walks through the door, she kind of keeps looking at me, and she goes right back to the treatment room. And then I look back at the waiting room, and he stands up. And he kind of shoves his fist in his pockets. He looks down at his shoes, shuffles across the waiting room, does not make eye contact with me, and walks right by me back to the treatment room, and we sit down. And I walk in, I sit down, and I had barely touched the seat. And his wife said, you told my husband he has normal hearing. He does not have normal hearing. You tell him right now he has a hearing loss. Finger in the face, very unhappy. And I remember looking down at the handwritten audiogram I had at that time and just thinking, there's no way I told him he had normal hearing. That's impossible. And I asked her thing, and I said, well, I did tell him his ear canals are clear. I told him his temps are normal. I told him his SRTs were consistent with the PTAs. I told him his hearing was good for low pitches and sloped to a mild to severe sloping sensory hearing loss, along with many other things. So if you take all of what I had told him a lot of things were normal and good. not the least of which the fact is the first thing I said to him when I walked in the booth was, good job, right? I reinforced the work he had done. Well, so that moment kind of crystallized something. I had done a very poor job in counseling my patient, even though I really was trying. Like, I had every intention of him understanding and leaving home with a thorough understanding of his hearing loss and the effects and what it means and what he can do and how he can make his life better. And he went home and told his wife, normal hearing. So we talked it through. What turns out kind of really happened was, I mean, the first thing I presented, your ear canals are clear. That is the one thing he remembered from my dissertation, right? So he went home, he equated clear ear canal with normal hearing, right? And so that just stunning. I mean, even his wife was like, I can't believe that. That's what you took from that. He's like, yeah, you said I had clear ears, right? So literally that day I started researching how I could create something that would help me counsel my patients better. And there's some great research from Dr. Bob Margolis out of the Minneapolis area, where he looked specifically at what patients remember, right? And this was some studies that were across medicines, wasn't specific to audiology.
Not a lot, let's put it that way.
That's right, exactly. But what basically we found was that a typical counseling session, only 25% of the information is remembered correctly. 25% is remembered wrong, and 50% is gone, right? And that's the moment they walk out the door. So all that great information you provided, you don't know which half they forgot, which quarter is wrong or which quarter is right. And so I started building, actually I called my brother as a developer, and we started building what occurred a single page counseling summary. And that's where the name CounselEAR comes from. And so the idea was, even if, you have 30 seconds for counseling, if you have 10 minutes for counseling, it doesn't matter. You still need to provide the patients with something that they can take home and review and share with other members of their family. And so that launched CounselEAR. So that idea moment was back in February 2005. So it's been a little while. We've been working for some time. But yeah, that's the origin story of how I ended up here.
Yeah, I mean, it's great. I mean, it's also a combination, as you know. Many people, as I say, when they come in with hearing loss, they know the punchline, right? And so some of them are already trying to put up the blocks to the punchline, right? And so, it's people when you'll tell them they have a hearing loss, they'll say, well, it's not that bad. It's like, well, I'm just trying to figure out what's a little bit of hearing loss. I'm not sure.
That's right.
What you miss. And then the other one is very typical with tinnitus patients is you'll explain to them all these things they can do, including treating their hearing loss. And then they'll say, so what you're telling me is there's nothing I can do. I'll go, well, actually, what I'm telling you is there are a lot of things you can do. What you're telling me is you don't like anything that I'm telling you. So there is that dynamic as well. And so I think sending something home in a written fashion that maybe the spouse could look at as well. And it actually, what you're also reaffirming, interestingly, is the data that supports bringing a spouse to the appointment is how it's important, because,
Absolutely.
It's not just to browbeat people into doing what they need to do. It's also because it's a shared experience. Hearing loss is not just in the patient, it's also in the people trying to communicate. So I'm very familiar with the tool. And so just for the listeners, it's kind of a click down, helps create, generated in a relatively expeditious fashion. It has pre-done templates, but you can also customize it. So it's initially a rapid, let's say, counseling documentation tool specifically targeted at hearing loss and ear-related problems. So, but that's not all you do now. So how long were you in that particular space?
Yeah. So after I started my private practice or bought my small private practice and grew that, I did sell that to an audiologist, a friend of mine, back in 2014. And at that point, CounselEAR transitioned from being really a documentation system where we're just creating the counseling summary and professional reports and chart notes. And then we expanded to the full office management system with, billing and telehealth and online scheduling and texting and all that fun stuff. So that was a good transition point, because I knew at some point CounselEAR was going to grow to the point where, and same thing with the private practice, or grow to the point where they couldn't manage them simultaneously. So yeah, it was a good, stressful time when you reach that point when two things are going really well and you're very happy with both. But it worked out really well. And the audiologist who bought my practice is fantastic. And so very pleased with that transition.
And so just out of curiosity, I mean, you're an audiologist, so you referenced it. Does your brother do the development? I mean, that probably most people think, I'd love to create software. that does certain things, but I'm a clinician. How do I get the technical backside? Because that would, to most people, I think, be the most onerous thing.
For sure, yeah. And so in that account, I'm extremely fortunate. So yes, my brother's a computer software developer, and so we started working together on it, slowly, and then we picked up pace. And so he's the CTO of CounselEAR, and we have a staff of 16 at this point. It's growing, but it really, and we talk about that, how fortunate we were that we managed to find something where we feel like there was a specific need. We feel like we had some insight in how to make it work, and we had like you said, the design expertise to get it done and to stay with it too. Because that's not a challenge. I've had people come up to me at conferences and say, I thought about creating that, or I started creating that, and sometimes it's really hard to maintain because everyone gets busy. If you're working with external programmers, that means you're probably paying them a lot, and you're having to come up with that cash before you actually have a business. So we were able to really grow kind of along the way.
Well, the other challenge obviously is maintaining or transitioning the infrastructure. In other words, the back, what people call in software the back end. Obviously, whatever was the back end of CounselEAR probably in 2006 is probably not the back end of CounselEAR in 2023. Is that correct?
That is correct. Yes, we've definitely changed over time. That's a big part of it. And we're fortunate we're a platform now where the system now allows for a lot, a crazy amount of scalability, and you can modify systems without having to disrupt any user experience. But you're absolutely right. It's certainly changed. And that was a really interesting time. When we first started looking at this in 2005, the idea was, well, we probably should create some sort of standalone system. Like, you get it on a disc. And, for a lot of the listeners, they're probably going to be like, why would you possibly put something on it like a CD?
There wasn't another alternative at the time, basically.
Well, right. And that's where, like, for example, quicksend testing, right? You get that on a CD. And that was sort of our idea, was you had a series of preset templates. You grab it off the CD, basically you customize and you print it. And then as we, that certainly was a time, getting into 2006, obviously internet, it was already big, but became a lot bigger very rapidly, and rapid use of other devices. Not too far away, then the iPad was introduced, and just things got a lot easier at a browser-based level. And so that allowed us to, at that point, I can remember my brother Rick at one point saying, like, we just have to make this online. Like, there's no way we're doing this as a CD. I'm like, okay, let's do that. And obviously that was the way to go.
Well, I mean, I would say just looking at medical EMRs, kind of the real kind of finally getting it version was when you stopped running it on your own server. And
yes, absolutely.
Cloud.
That's a great point. Yeah.
No longer have to, I had a server and no longer do, and perfectly happy not to have somebody else maintain backups and integrity and security and antivirals and all of that. And the other beauty is it's available wherever. I mean, I can be on my iPhone, my iPad, my laptop. It's anywhere. So I assume you have the same thing for CounselEAR.
Correct. Absolutely. Yeah. Fully clouded. So, and that was in my private practice. That was nice too, because the system they had previously was a self-hosted system, and you just have the hassles with that. So transitioning to cloud was very nice.
So what have been some of the challenges going from a clinical audiologist to a CEO of a software platform for audiologists? So there's probably liaising with audiologists might be challenging, and then there might be internal challenges.
Yeah, there are a few. I mean, it reminds me too of when I started when I bought my private practice. I didn't have any business training, right? Like I take it back. I did a few classes through my AD program, so I did have
like business audiology, right?
That's exactly right, and those were great. Like that was great, but it's a little tricky when you're opening the bank account and getting the business licensed and figuring out QuickBooks. That's really where the rubber hits the road. So I guess I had some exposure as part of that, because once again I was developing CounselEAR at the same time, the business of CounselEAR at the same time I was developing the business of my practice, and so there was some crossover, which helped. But that's probably been the most challenging side of it is, and any, I can say business will probably tell you this, the HR side of things, the just business management, the planning. We work on a very kind of rapid development cycle. So we're pushing out changes frequently, and that's been really great for us because it allows us to evolve very quickly. We're pushing out changes every 2 weeks.
Wow.
And so it's just this constant development cycle, and that's really helped us a lot. But the flip side of that is
You're putting in a change every 2 weeks.
yeah, that's right. Yeah, 20 to 30 changes, right? I mean, these are behind the scenes that no one notices, but you got to stay on top of that. And at the same time, you're saying, okay, well, this business is growing quickly, and we're hiring more staff, and so that has been a very interesting thing, and it's been great. We've been really fortunate with our staff, with our team. People keep expanding into roles, so we have some people on staff that worked in private practices, like maybe front office or back office staff, and so they have that skill set, and then they expand their honestly beyond what they've done in the past, and it's really worked well for us because they got that experience, and they're kind of teaching other new staff members within CounselEAR, and so to that extent, I've been incredibly fortunate. So I say HR is a challenge, it is. But I've been about as fortunate as anyone could be in that regard.
Well, how about like in terms of just the growth or I mean, is there any challenge, or is it just you're part of the audiology tribe, so it works for you, or?
Yeah, I mean, I went to a lot of conferences for many years, and shook a lot of hands and caught people walking down the hallway when they probably didn't want to talk to me. What's that?
Yes, babies, right?
Yeah, there's a lot of that. Yeah, I was just trying to get the right people's attention at the right time and see them again at the next conference, and because no one's heard of of CounselEAR, and so yeah, there was a lot of that. It was many years of doing the talks and meeting people and gradually building, and in some ways that was frustrating because you always want to grow faster, but the flip side is, once again, it really gave us time to just keep building the system, and so if someone gave us a no, we were able to find out typically why they were saying no. Right. And then that gave us some great feedback for, okay. And so there were absolutely some people that said no because of this. We developed, to that concept or that endpoint, whatever they needed, and then came back 6 months later or 2 months later or 2 years later, and they said, yeah, I'm a yes now. Right. So that was nice to be able to kind of keep building that over time.
So
that was
how fast have you grown over the past 10 years? Percentage.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I could say in general, we've we're over 2,000 clinics that use CounselEAR now. At 10 years ago, that number was probably like 400.
Yeah, I don't know. What's the market size?
Well, that's a great question. I should have a good answer for you. I don't have a great answer because when I've looked into it, everyone has a different number. I've talked to different management groups who spent time on this, manufacturers, and so I don't want to throw anything out there because I might be right on one metric and wrong on another. So but yes. And we just launched in Australia as well. So we spent about a year in development for the Australian healthcare system. We launched this spring, and that's been great. Other than the time change, which is always challenging for us and them, it's been wonderful, and they've been incredibly friendly.
And currency management, I assume.
Currency management, yes, absolutely, yeah. So that actually isn't too bad. That was not too bad, but there's a lot of considerations as to how you make things mesh with their healthcare system. So just even the way you think about tax is different in Australia than the way you think about tax here, or the way you think about. Yeah.
Are you the software provider for the Australian health system, or one of them?
So one of them, yeah. So we do integrate with HSP, it's called, the Health Services Program. But there are several office management systems in the Australian space.
Yeah, I would think, not for anything, but I would think one of your major competitors that's owned by a Australian cochlear implant company might.
Sure. Yep.
So, where do you see things going in terms of, what are your future directions in terms of, I know growth and stuff, but in terms of the platform itself? So like, what are the types of features or enhancements that you're working on at this point?
Yeah. So a lot of this stuff goes to, as we expand the system, the opportunities and the requests, keep expanding. So, for example, we have a patient portal now, which allows patients to sign in and do a bunch of things and make payments and everything. We plan on expanding that to make that more of a communication platform, so for two-way communication between the provider, secure communication with the provider and
like an email system that's secure.
Exactly, that's right. Similar that we'd have in your hospital system type.
Yeah, just for listeners, regular email is not considered privacy secure, just to let listeners know. And that has to do with the fact that, frankly, somebody else could read it. And so it actually has to be password protected even to read it, not something that necessarily just goes onto your cell phone or onto your desktop. And so because of that, we're not trying to make it hard. The privacy requirements make it a little onerous. So that's why they're developing their own platform.
Right. And from the patient perspective on that, as a provider perspective, it's tough because you're like, I want to just shoot these emails. And a lot of times patients will say, I just want to shoot these emails. But from a patient, if their information was ever compromised in some way, then they would go, oh, this is horrible. And so so you're right, it is onerous, but we do want to be one step ahead of that and keep that information safe.
Well, I think it's just people getting used to it, right? I mean, the reality is as a practical matter, you really can't deal with Amazon except by going onto Amazon's website, and you can't deal with an airline except going on an airline's website. So people might want to be able to use emails, but by and large, that's kind of how it all works. I mean, if you have a customer service issue on Amazon, there is no help at Amazon.com. You actually have to go inside of their system. And so it's of the same nature that it's going into the particular practice's ecosystem. So that's kind of the mindset.
Right. Yep.
Okay. And I assume growth, but what else are you guys working on?
Yeah. So some other things, we're working on tools to kind of expand the business metric features within CounselEAR to be able to, see. We have a lot of tools built already, but a lot of just to see the data better. There's a lot of things we're always doing behind the scenes, and it sounds really boring, but just to make things work faster. So when people click on a tool and it responds in 2 seconds or 1 second instead of 3 seconds, that's the kind of stuff that from a user experience, or half a second actually is more of the goal. And you're loading vast quantities of data. We're also working on tools for filtering your database to look for potential cochlear implant patients. We're working on tools to expand the system for high-frequency audiometry, for low-frequency audiometry, for tinnitus, and possibly some other sub-tests as well.
So I assume it integrates with NOAA, is that correct?
That's correct. Yep.
And so for NOAA listeners, NOAA is a standardized audiologic data storage format system. So the data is stored, so computer programs such as Brian's can integrate and pull it up in a standardized fashion. And so that's kind of the industry standard. You want to be on NOAA. That's what, I don't know what NOAA stands for.
Right.
I probably did at one point, but I don't know what it stands for now.
I think it's one software for all. It's actually, I think, a reference to Nozark. If I was guessing, but I'm not sure.
Oh, there you go. That's actually very clever. I didn't. I mean, somebody was thinking
it could be an acronym. I'm not sure. Yeah.
It is one software for all. So kind of, in the space that we're talking about, that Brian's software is without NOAA, you're kind of not really integrated in the audiologic world.
Yeah. And to your question before, as far as the challenge that we're looking to do, a lot of this once again is directed at at the patient experience. The online scheduling built in, making, continue to make that more conducive, just make it easier. We have, telehealth built in to make it easier to talk to a provider face-to-face in a secure format, very, very easily. One thing we work with clinics routinely on is how you handle some of the routine, as a patient, if I call in and I've got a problem, my right hearing isn't working, right? There's some very simple triage that a practice can do to ask some basic questions and then say, let's have a look, right? And then fire up telehealth, and in a matter of a minute, you can be face-to-face with your provider. You can hold it up to the camera and they can go, the wax guard's plugged. Let me talk you through how to change that. And now you're hearing again. And you didn't necessarily have to make a trip into the provider. You didn't have to take off time off of work or whatever the case may be. Those simple things really, I think as providers and audiologists myself, I think we're in some ways reticent to pass on some of the face-to-face, the in-person. But from I'm also a patient, right? We're all patients. We all seek healthcare for different reasons. From that perspective, being able to just get an answer to my question and get it fixed and move on in a matter of minutes, it's a pretty powerful experience.
Yeah, no, I think that's a wonderful addition. And now, obviously, to some extent, our hands were all forced during COVID. So there was a big,
for sure. Absolutely.
And it made it acceptable. And having that on your platform is really, really important, in my opinion. And so that's a great addition. So did you ever think you would be running a software company? Was that ever in your mind's eye?
I never thought I'd be a business owner. I quite remember someone asking me when I was in graduate school, if I ever wanted to own a private practice. And my answer was no, because I don't want to have two jobs, audiologist and a business owner. I want to focus on the audiology. That's what I want to do. That's what I'm going to school for. It's what I love. And then, that changed. So I do tell it to students who I have a good opportunity to talk to different groups of students and do lectures and things. And that's the point I usually make is like, things will change, your expectations, whatever you want. So just stay open to it, basically. Like there's no predefined path here, which is great because it does allow you to change. I mean, when I first went to grad school, I was going to be a pediatric audiologist for sure. That was it, and I still love pediatrics and I worked with a lot of peds, but pretty shortly into grad school became, I really want to be a vestibular audiologist. I'm really enjoying this aspect of it. And what's nice about that is I was able to, in my first couple jobs, do a lot of ped testing and evaluation and fitting. And then in my private practice, I was able to incorporate vestibular testing and rehabilitation and things like that. And so that stuff carried through, but turned out my primary focus was quite different.
Right. Well, I mean, because you had an idea and you wanted to take it to fruition. I'm assuming, right? And so in terms of getting back to actually the counseling, I assume that there are templates loaded into the system. Is that correct?
Yes. So everything's templated. So it based off the test data that's been entered, it can easily, pick the closest. Actually, in fact, I referenced Dr. Bob Margolis before. We use his system AmClass to do automatic classification of the audiogram. That translates into the patient report. So it automatically then populates a layman's term description of the hearing loss and specific recommendations. And so the focus is that can be done very, very quickly. And the primary points get across. I referenced speaking with students. One of the things that I bring up every time I talk with students is if there's one idea you can get across during a counseling session. So you have a patient who has a hearing loss. There's one idea you can communicate. What is that? Right? And you usually get a lot of ideas, putting things out, and they're like, I need simpler. What's a simple single thing you can do? And that is you have a hearing loss, right? In many cases, if you can communicate that effectively to the patient and they can understand that I have a hearing loss, like that's, in many cases, that's the best you're going to do that day, right? Because so many times they walk away saying, no, I don't have a hearing loss, or it's normal for my age, or it's, not a big deal. But just the fact that you do have a hearing loss and it's affecting your life, okay, let's start there. Because it might be 6 months or a year before they're ready to talk more. If it takes, 6 to 7, 8 years for a patient first to see us for an evaluation, they might need a little more time, right? It isn't all of a sudden like, okay, I'm ready to really accept this now. So that's what a lot of the counseling summaries need to do, is just get that basic idea across. And then hopefully you can go from there.
So does the report get handed to the patient, mailed to the patient, or emailed to the patient?
So it can be,
that's the answer.
Yeah. Yeah, the answer is yes. Yeah. So all those methods. Yeah. And so it just depends on what's the most conducive. It can be faxed as well. Whatever's the most conducive, or seen through the portal, whatever's the best for the patient.
And so do you have any metrics as to what's more effective? It's just kind of a curious.
So that's a great question. So there was actually a study that was done, and this has been some time at Oklahoma State University. We kind of there were some students there that were interested in doing some research on counseling. This goes back to probably like 2011, 2012. And not surprising, they found a dramatic change in the patient's ability to remember important information when they were provided with a counseling summary. So if we take that metric before from Dr. Margolis saying 25% remembered correctly, and the 25 not, and 25 or 50 forgotten, that 25% went to, it was like 80, I think it was like 87% when they were provided with a counseling summary. And they did follow-up calls, I believe it was at 24 hours and at 1 week. And they had told me that they would call patients and the patient would say, well, can I use the summary? Meaning like they had it there. Can I answer these questions with the summary? And the answer was yes, absolutely. Like that's why you have it. That's a perfect example. And what's neat about this was these were first year graduate students.
Right. So
they didn't have any special training.
Right. They're just getting wet behind the ears, right?
That's right. And they were given a template. What was really cool about this too is they also built in a template list of topics they were going to cover. So when they walked in the booth, the first thing they said was, basically you have a hearing loss or you do not have a hearing loss, right? Simple. It is in one or both ears. And they had a list of I think it was 7 or 8 points. Every single patient, they did the exact same thing. So I think that also amplified the ability of the patients to remember important information because they presented it in a really clear, concise, kind of top priority down kind of approach. So that was a really, really neat thing to see that those types of approaches could have a really significant effect.
Do you have metrics measuring downstream effectiveness? In other words, that there's better adoption or better outcomes? I mean, this might be a little harder to have, but interesting.
It would be very interesting. And now I want to do that. We do not at this moment, but I would love to see that. And I think anecdotally, we hear that quite a lot, from clinics that routinely use the counseling summary.
Well, you'd have to go like a provider, get their effectiveness, start using CounselEAR and see a bump, right? That would really, what would be measurable, right? Because you have to factor out the provider themselves, right?
You do. That's right. You need some control there. But I think that would be fascinating. So yeah, anecdotally, we've heard quite a bit of good feedback, but yeah, at this point, we haven't collected data on it.
Well, that's great. So other question I would like to ask everybody, Brian, is what's your favorite sound?
I always love the when someone has, especially kids, but anyone, whenever it has that laugh of delight when something surprises them, and it's surprisingly really happy. Maybe they're distracted and someone does something and they have that that's not a good example, sorry. But just that unplanned,
the genuine chuckle.
Genuine chuckle, right? They're not moderating. I'm worried about what it sounds like, maybe it's a big guffaw, right? One of those big, the belly laughs or whatever it is, but just those genuine caught me off guard. I love that.
Yeah, that is a great sound. So this is, for the listeners, this is Brian Urban. He's a doctor of audiology and the president of CounselEAR. Brian, if people wanted to get a hold of you, how would they get a hold of you?
Sure. So you can go directly to CounselEAR.com. You can reach out to our support team and they can reach out to me. Otherwise, you can certainly find me on LinkedIn. You can find me on Facebook. LinkedIn is probably the place I would check the most. So yeah, please feel free to reach out to me there.
Well, this has been great, Brian, and I admire your grit for bringing this to fruition. It's a great product, and I appreciate you sharing your perspective on it with us today in the audience. Thanks for coming on to the podcast. Again, for everybody, it's Brian Urban. He's a doctor of audiology and president of CounselEAR.
Thank you so much. I love your show. I really appreciate it.
Appreciate it. Thanks.
Thanks for tuning in to the Listen Up podcast. We'll see you again next time, and be sure to click subscribe to get updates on future episodes.